conversation is going round. People talking about the colors come to town. Fresh as a summer breeze, she'll take you by surprise.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Freshwaves here on Whistle FM. We have a great show lined up today. Lots of exciting things, but before we get started, a great shout out going out to Reese's Market and Bakery for all the wonderful muffins that they've provided us in the studio today. We have a smorgasbord of flavors and delicacies before our eyes, and they are absolutely wonderful. I love Reese's at this time of the year because I like it when someone does my baking for me. I don't have time to bake, and I'm the world's worst baker. Honestly, it's really sad. Cookies that turn out like hockey pucks, and I don't know, cakes that you can't cut with a knife. You probably need a hacksaw. It's just not me. So I love it. I go into Reese's, I buy all my shortbreads, I buy all my little cakes, and I put them out on a plate, and no one knows I didn't bake them myself.
Thank goodness for Reese's to help us.
Yeah, I don't kind of let people know that I bought them. And then they just think they're homemade. What the heck? So, we have Victoria Grant joining us in the studio this morning, and we're really, really, really blessed to have her here because she's just a wealth of information. And Jason, welcome to the show, just saying. And Ivan Harris, nice to see you this morning too. Ivan's waving to us as he closes the door. This is going to be fun. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm kind of rambling.
Are you?
Good.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. You're doing a good ramble.
Well, it's nice to have you back.
Nice to be back.
We're going to start the show the way we did the last time because I had a lot of response from listeners who really enjoyed that. And there are new listeners listening this morning. So I want to respectfully ask you what I should call you. First Nations, indigenous. What are you, Victoria Grant?
Well, first of all, I am Victoria Grant.
Yes.
And I guess one of the ways we think of ourselves, or at least I think of myself, is I think of where I come from. And so I'm Timiagama Anishinaabe, and I want people to know me as Timiagama Anishinaabe Kwe, which is a deep water woman. Timiagama Anishinaabe.
I know how to say that one.
And Anishinaabe is people. That's what it means.
Really?
Yeah. So the Anishinaabe is a linguist group that we all speak. Our base language is the same, but our dialects are different. Oh, okay. And that would go somewhere from Quebec, Lower Quebec, where the Golden Lake and those Giddigan Zibi, they're all Anishinaabe people, and it goes up to around, I guess, the whole Williams Treaty are Anishinaabe people.
Oh, neat.
But different. So, but it means, and I shouldn't be saying Anishinaabe people because effectively what I'm saying is people. People.
Yeah. You are people.
Yeah. So Anishinaabe, and I always, when I introduce myself, I don't introduce myself as indigenous, ever.
You don't like that word?
It's not that I don't like the word. Indigenous means, the word indigenous, you can be an indigenous plant.
Right.
You can be an indigenous rock.
You can be an indigenous bug. Yeah.
So it's not. So when people use the word indigenous,
what does it mean?
They're not. It's kind of like you're not even talking. You're not identifying. You're using a descriptor to try and identify the indigenous peoples of Canada. Mm-hmm. And there's many different peoples of Canada. I have a friend of mine who talks about Ontario having had three civilizations. The Haudenosaunee.
Yeah, that's down by...
That's the Great Lakes, really the Great Lakes area.
Yeah.
And then the Anishinaabe.
Mm-hmm. Which is a little further north.
Well, that's here, where we are, right? Oh. Where we're sitting on Anishinaabe land.
Anishinaabe? The Wendat?
Wendat would, I think their language is based in the same, but they're kind of as I understand it, they are a little different, but probably their language is close to ours, and so that because they kind of got moved, right? They got kind of shoved out, but by the some people say by the Haudenosaunee, some people say by Anishinaabe. Whatever happened, they moved, and this was the traditional territory of they were here. The Anishinaabe people were here, and the Haudenosaunee were here. And the Dish with One Spoon Treaty comes from that's the earliest treaty ever for this area, and it's something like 15,000 years ago.
Wow.
So, and it was about how they were going to share this land, this particular land around the Great Lakes, and look after it properly. So, so then the other civilization they talk about is the Cree people to the north. And when you think about it, a civilization is known to have a culture, governance, and we had all of those things in a language.
Yeah.
So we were three distinct cultures within.
So the Cree were north of where the
Cree is north, sort of Thunder Bay.
Right. So north of
Timmins.
Anishinaabe.
Yeah.
And then did the Inuit come down that low at that time?
The
do you
Inuit,
think?
no, the Inuit
they were
are north of the Cree, and I don't know if there would have been Inuit in what we describe as Ontario today.
Yeah, would have been north of there, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting. So we've talked before about the fact that the maps were made by the rivers and the waterways.
Yeah, and there's a great map. If you ever get the opportunity, the Canadian Canoe Museum, they have a map of just rivers and water.
Isn't that neat?
And it is incredible to look at. It really gives you a total different sense of Canada.
It would make perfect sense.
Because those were your natural routes, right? That's how people moved, was on the water.
Well, I always thought it was kind of silly, quite honestly, when you see the border between Canada and the U.S. and it goes right through the middle of the Great Lakes. You're thinking, okay, how do we mark that exactly? It's like the fishermen out there. Yeah, drop an anchor here so we remember where it is next time. There's no such thing. You know what I mean? It's just an arbitrary line that people draw in the sand, and we understand there has to be boundaries, I guess, politically in this day and age.
Well,
but
even think of property boundaries in town. We all live on these square things, and we're all, instead of working together to create a block and try and figure out what's the best way to get rid of water, what's the best way to do this, we're all doing it individually on these little blocks. I mean, it's...
And we can't look at the world that way anymore. We really can't. The world is becoming a global world. It is. Yeah. It has to be. It has to be. Yeah. Something happens in... a nuclear thing happens in Japan. It affects the whole Earth, not just Japan.
Well, and I don't think the nuclear thing is the thing to be afraid of. I think the big thing we got to deal with is climate change.
And water.
Well, climate change and water are one and the same.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
It is. I think that's the biggest fear we have as people on this planet.
I think so, too. We're going to talk about water this morning, and Nibi Wabo, and the blessing of water. And I think we're going to hear this speech. Have we got it lined up for later in the show? We have the speech from Autumn, and we'll hear what she said to the United Nations about water. And I hope that she starts a movement with young people. I really do believe that it's young people who are the stewards of the future, and we need to be making sure that they're aware of just how precious these gifts on Earth really are.
I agree with you completely. I think and actually having spent some time with youth on the Students on Ice boat this summer, actually I would be horrified. People would be horrified that I called it a boat. It's actually a ship.
Yeah. It's on the water. It floats. It's a boat.
I went from Greenland to Baffin Island, and with 135 students, and about 60% of them were Inuit kids. And it was incredible. It was really incredible to be a part of that journey with those kids.
You do amazing things. Can you come on the show like once a month and just tell us all the fabulous things that you've been doing? It's insane. And you did for the Canada 150, you did part of the sail that went around the Arctic too.
Yeah, I did. I went around Alaska. So I got on the boat in Tuktoyaktuk and went to Prince Rupert, BC.
Wow.
all around. That was pretty incredible too.
That must have been
That was
incredible.
actually that was a small different like the trip this summer was with youth, and there were about 200 of us, a little over 200 of us on the ship. The trip around Alaska was with about 50 of us on the ship, and so totally and all
A whole
and all
different feel.
adults.
Right.
Yeah.
So the youth, what was the purpose of them leaving from Greenland and coming here?
So Students on Ice is a Canadian foundation, which does this trip every year.
Wow.
And kids can apply to go to it. It is a remarkable experience, and it's been going on for about 18 years. And they take kids, I think they're 18, no, I think they're young, yeah. I think you have to be 14 or something, teenage years, to 18, and then they have some older ones between 18 and university kids, and then they bring teachers along who have bring different attributes to the board. They'll have scientists, they'll have people who are, I guess, geologists, who are actually kind of natural environment people, and then they have a lot of the Inuit kids go, and then kids from all over the world come to this thing, and this has been going on for 18 years, and we had a kid from our community go on that trip. So
from the Manitoulin Island or from Stoughton?
From Temagami.
Oh, Temagami. Wow.
Yeah, and she, she raised all her own money to go on it, and in our community.
Wow.
And so she did she was, I think it forever changed her, but it certainly forever changed me. I mean, it was what I learned about the Inuit people, and how different they are, how different, when we talk about indigenous peoples, we kind of in Canada want to put indigenous peoples all in the same box and say, we got to help these people, and they have all these attributes and challenges. But that's not real.
No, it's not.
So, we all have different cultures. We all have different, some people on that boat who weren't indigenous knew and understood their culture way better than I did. Just because I was Anishinaabe or one of the indigenous peoples of Canada didn't make me have the same history as them.
Well, that would be true of all peoples. I don't know why we always think everyone is so different from everyone else. We're all the same. You can go into downtown Toronto, mark off a little square, 500 meters by 500 meters, and see who's in the square.
I think
nobody's the same.
Yeah, but I don't think you can say everybody's the same, because
they're not the same, but we're all in the same.
The world would be awfully boring.
We're all in the same boat, I mean, in that we're all different, and none of us, to think that all First Nations people in Canada were the same people all living in the one big country like we kind of do today politically and geographically. It didn't exist back then, and there were little pockets of people, but even within Canada right now.
It still doesn't exist.
Exactly. The people in the Maritimes have their own kind of culture. Even between provinces in the Maritimes, there are differences in the culture. Even between spots, you look at the people in Cape Breton versus the people who are living in Peggy's Cove. It's different. It's just different, and a lot of that is based on geography.
And the big difference is the indigenous peoples of Canada were here. All those other people came.
Exactly.
And they developed different cultures depending on their geography, because that's what determines, part of what determines culture is your geography.
Yep.
What you need to know and how to live and how you communicate.
Right.
Is all part of your culture. And if you live in, the north, your culture is going to be totally different, because it's colder. You got to dress differently.
You eat differently, much differently.
Yeah, oh yeah, very much so. I learned that.
Was that a good thing or not so good thing?
It was a very good thing. I had never eaten raw. I've eaten raw fish at sushi. I mean, I'd never eaten raw whale, and they call it muktak. And So when they were sharing the whale, I remember I took just a little wee tiny piece, and I thought, because I didn't want to waste it, and I didn't want to take something I didn't think I would eat. So I took it, and then I ate it. And then I went back and said, let me try another little piece of that. And she said, so I had another little piece. And then I went back for a third, I wouldn't call it a helping, because the third time I did get a helping. She said, Nancy, one of the girls on the trip, looked at me and she said, okay, now you're going to get a helping of it. No more little bites. And it was actually quite good.
It's really good. I had whale when I was in Norway, and it's a byproduct. Whales are never killed for their meat. They're killed for other things, blubber and all the rest of it. And it's lean, right? Because of the anatomy of a whale, where the blubber is between the skin and the flesh. That's where all the blubber is. So the meat's really lean. I loved it.
Yeah.
It was really yummy.
Yes.
It was really
so
good.
Did I. It was really neat.
And it's fun to try those different foods, and it's fun to be immersed in a culture enough that you can lend yourself to trying some of this stuff, because some of it isn't what you're accustomed to. I had moose stew the other day, 2 weeks ago. It was absolutely delicious.
It's one of my favorites.
It was stew. So good. Yeah. It was so good. And it's interesting. I worked with a nutritionist and herbologist, and he was an acupuncturist, born in Tibet, educated in Tibet and China, the United States and Canada. And his theory was, you always eat the food from the land that you live on, because that is the food from the earth that is designed for you, where you live. Don't be eating food that comes from the other side of the earth, where it's warm and sunny now, because it contains nutrients for people who are living in a hot and sunny place. And you need something that's coming from a place that's cold and rugged, where you are living now. It's a very interesting philosophy, because it really does, I think the food sort of rings true in many ways.
I think, that's part of what they talk about with the slow food movement, right? That's eat local and cook your food, don't buy processed food. But not everybody can do that.
Right. It's really difficult. And when you're living in the far north, the growing season isn't that long.
Actually, it's probably easier in the far north to eat locally, because if they can't afford to eat what's in the stores usually.
Yeah, it's so expensive.
I mean, it's crazy. So, bringing in some of that stuff probably was a good idea, but also it changes the way you live, right?
Yeah, it does.
It changes what you do, and you certainly can't think about changing their diets. When I listen to the seal hunters, for instance, people talking about the seal. Well, those people love seal. The people who live in that area love and eat seal, and the fact that they make products out of the mitts and things like that, that's their economy. And it's true that's so you have these people who say it's cruel to kill seals. Well, I don't know. I have to think about,
Yeah, it is cruel if you do it in a way that doesn't make the seal population sustainable. But if you're doing it in a sustainable way, then there's nothing wrong with it. It's the same as using any animal. When you look at the way that the First Nations, for lack of a better word, used to, or the Wendat that were living here, the way that they used a deer, there wasn't one piece of that deer that was wasted. Not one scrap. The fur was used, the hide was used, the meat was used, the hooves were used, the antlers were used, beautiful beads and artwork made with bone, needles and awls for poking through leather were made with bone. Everything was used. Every little piece was used. Nothing went to waste. What a great way to live.
Yeah.
You look at the waste in our environment right now.
Well, look at the plastic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the great tragedies. That I guess one of the things that stays with me from the Canada C3 trip is I pay way more attention to my use of plastic and how much plastic I bring in the house. But even with all of that, even if you buy every piece of food that you can cook, getting away from plastic is almost impossible.
Oh, yeah. look at the medical system. If you go into the medical
Yeah.
system, into any hospital, the amount of plastic that is used and one-time use only, and understandably for germs and all the rest of it, you get it why it's done that way, but still, it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
We got to get smart enough to make it recyclable or reusable.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that grocery store out west where they have a totally plastic-free grocery store. You bring your own containers, you bring
Yeah.
your own bags, you bring whatever you need to carry your stuff home, and nothing comes in packages. It's really interesting. It's going to take a little getting used to, I can honestly say, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, and there's so many things you got to think about too. I guess I'm trying hard. One of the things I'm talking to is, I've talked to a couple of grocery stores who I've asked if I could bring my own glass bottles in to buy some things, and one of them is very receptive, but others just look at you like you're
Five
like
heads.
we can't do that, because you'd have to, what that would involve is me walking in, getting the bottle weighed prior to going in. They'd have to mark the weight down, and then
Fill it.
and then they can take that weight off on the scale. But it's complicated.
It is complicated, and it's going to take a lot of people putting their heads together to come up with some ways
Yeah.
that are going to work to save this planet.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a kind of funny thing, because I was talking with some elders at drum camp this year, and one of them said, people keep saying that we have to save the planet. She said, the planet will survive. It's humans that won't.
Exactly.
That's an interesting thing to think. The
Yeah.
world without us, that's an amazing book,
Yeah.
and it talks about, you want to get rid of a barn, cut a 1 foot by 1 foot hole in the ceiling, and watch the barn disintegrate. Only takes a few years, and the barn collapses.
Yeah.
You watch the volcanoes in Hawaii. They have spots where the volcanoes have erupted 100 years ago, and in the cracks in the lava rock, little plants growing through. It is amazing what this
Yeah.
planet can do, and the rejuvenation that happens within this planet. The planet will live. We might not, but the planet will. We're going to take a little break now. You're listening to Fresh Waves. We have Victoria Grant in the station with us this morning. I'm your host, Bren Masson. We'll be back right after this, so stay tuned.